that Senator Merkley and I be permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each prior to the scheduled roll call vote.
Without objection.
Madam President, I want to thank my colleague from California, my co-sponsor on the War Powers resolution that will be heard within the next 48 hours or so. And I spoke on this at some length Thursday before the President launched the U.S. attack on Iran on Saturday morning. And I asked the question, have we learned nothing from 25 years of war in the Middle East? Have we learned nothing? And have we learned nothing from nearly 2 decades plus of war against Iraq and Afghanistan? And I wanted to go into what did the wars against Iraq and Afghanistan mean? Because they mean some things that should compel us to learn some lessons. And then I'll talk about at least a couple of lessons we should learn. In Afghanistan, 2,324 U.S. service members were killed, uniformed troops and DoD civilian, and 3,917 United States citizens who were contractors were killed. 6,241 people were killed, American service members and contractors. 20,913 military personnel were injured in Afghanistan. The injuries among our contractors is unknown. There was a number that was up to 2,500 by March 2007, but we were there until 2021. The actual number is much higher. So 6,241 Americans killed in Afghanistan, and as far as we know, probably more than 25,000 United States military personnel and contractors were injured. Afghan civilians, 46,319 Afghan civilians' deaths have been directly attributed to the war in Afghanistan. What was the cost to the American taxpayer of the war in Afghanistan? $2.3 trillion total cost, including the interest and the future obligation for veterans' care, for the veterans who served so honorably. So when I ask about have we learned anything in the last 25 years from the war in Afghanistan, those 6,241 deaths, 25,000 injuries, $2.3 trillion should have taught us something. In Iraq, 4,598 U.S. military personnel were killed in Iraq. I remember early in my time as governor going to Iraq to visit the Virginia Guard troops that were deployed there and going to the base where somebody I went to church with, who was a state employee at our Department of Social Services, had been killed. 4,598 U.S. military personnel killed, and 3,650 U.S. contractors were killed in Iraq, totaling 8,248 American service member contractors killed in Iraq. The total killed in both Iraq and Afghanistan, 14,489 Americans lost their lives. Each one of them had a name. Each one of them had a family. Each one of them had a life of experience. Each one of them had a future that was never to be. We ought to have learned something from this. In Iraq, 32,000 of our troops were injured, and another 10,569 contractors were injured. That should teach us something. And in the Iraqi civilian population, this was a harder one to analyze and estimate, but the estimates are somewhere between 185,000 and 208,000 Iraqi civilians were killed. And the total cost of the Iraq war, to add to the $2.3 trillion of the war in Afghanistan, was $2.9 trillion, and that's the military cost plus the veterans' care. If you add up the cost of both of these wars, the cost of the war, the cost of the veterans' care, and then the interest on the debt we incurred to pay for the war, the total cost to American taxpayers of 25 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan was nearly $8 trillion. Here's a statistic that stunned me. As of 2021, nearly 31,000 U.S. service members and veterans who served in the 9/11 era, post-9/11 era, died by suicide. 4 times the number of service members who were killed. We should have learned something. We should have learned something. What are the lessons that we should learn from this carnage? From 14,489 of our Americans killed, from 41,000 plus 25, 66,000 of our troops and contractors injured, all this civilian death, all this money. What should we learn? First, that we should not be going into a war in the Middle East or anywhere without a good, solid reason that has had its tires kicked and that has demonstrated that is of a magnitude sufficient to warrant losses that could reach this scale. So what is the reason asserted for going to war with Iran? The president has asserted many reasons. We're doing it to stop their nuclear program, but he had obliterated it 6 months ago, and he had a diplomatic deal that controlled it that he tore up 7 or 8 years ago. So it's not about the nuclear program. We want to protect Iranian protesters. But wait a minute. This president is deporting to Iran Iranian refugees living in the United States, including Iranian refugees who will be persecuted in Iran because of their religion. He doesn't care about Iranians being mistreated by the regime. We need to go to war to stop a ballistic missile program, but the intelligence, as publicly reported, suggests that the missile program is not such that it would pose danger to the United States mainland for at least a decade. The president tweeted the other night we should go to war with Iran, or suggested because they interfered in the 2020 election. He's blaming them because he still can't admit that he lost the 20. Is that what we should send our sons and daughters into war for, because the president can't admit that he lost the 2020 election? Or maybe it's about oil. What are the 2 nations that the president has invaded? Venezuela and Iran. Boy, they're really different nations, except there's one thing about them that's in common. They are both oil-producing nations. This president has asserted no real reason that is clear to the American public, and that's why the American public so far is so against this. And then the other thing is, you shouldn't go in and run this risk with no reasons. And even if you have a reason, you shouldn't go in without a plan. So what's the plan? The president has said it would be 2 or 3 days. The president has said it will be 5 or 6 weeks. The president has said, I'm not going to rule out boots on the ground. The president has said, we will bomb until we're done, and then Iranians take over your government. I mean, that's the plan? We're going to bomb until we stop, and then it's a jump ball for whoever wants to take over. That's not a plan. It's not a plan that is well designed when Kuwait shoots down 3 U.S. F-15s. Kuwait is an ally. We're working together with Kuwait. And in the opening days of this, if an ally is shooting down 3 U.S. F-15s because, oh, wow, we didn't realize they were U.S. planes, what kind of a plan is that? There's no rationale and there's no plan. And without a rationale or a plan, why would we ignore the lessons of the last 25 years? Look, I pray, just like we all do, that the consequences of Iran will not be those that I read to you earlier, the consequences of Iraq and the consequences of Afghanistan. But Iran is a bigger nation than both, with a bigger population than both, and a more powerful military than both. We went into Iraq and achieved what many thought was a very prompt victory. Mission accomplished. We will be viewed as liberators. It seemed like it was smooth sailing a month in. And then 10 years later, those numbers kept racking up and racking up and racking up. Used Lincoln's words from his second inaugural, fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that the consequences of a war against Iran will not be what were the consequences of wars against Iraq and Afghanistan, but we would be foolish to stand here and say we know they will not be. We have to have the humility to acknowledge with the fact that U.S. service members have already lost their lives and been injured, that we could face serious consequences in the loss and death of our troops, serious consequences in instability in the region, serious consequences in rising energy prices for Americans. Who in the world will be the chief beneficiary of energy prices going up, the cost of oil going up? I'll tell you who. Vladimir Putin. Russia has an economy that is very centered on oil exports and on the prices of natural gas. And Vladimir Putin has just seen a massive surplus likely come in to the Russian state treasury for a significant period of time, as long as energy prices are elevated by this war in the Middle East. We will have this war powers vote within the next 48 hours or so. And every member of this body will do the most solemn thing any of us ever do. Vote on whether the United States should be at war. That sounds like an abstraction. Vote on whether we want to send our own kids, our own sons and daughters, the most precious resource we have in this country, into a war that could end up like the wars we have just recently exited in the same region. I pray so hard for my colleagues to exercise the judgment that this is not the right time for more war. If more war with Iran would be the answer, we've been at war with them essentially since 1953, when we toppled their democratically elected government. And it's been back and forth for 70 years. Us striking them striking us striking them striking us, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people killed. If more war were the answer, we would have found it before now. It's not the answer now. I pray that colleagues will support the War Powers Resolution, and I now, Madam President, yield.
The senator from Oregon.
I so much